were drawing attention to the fact that in vision, we feel like we're getting a perfect veridical view. But in fact...
When you say vertical, you mean just totally...
everything's coming in the way it really is, right? That's the way it feels. We're seeing everything that's there. We're not missing anything. We're not making anything up. And that's a very useful and healthy illusion, but which covers up all this activity going on, all the processing, trying to figure out, constructing a visual image. And social cognition is the same. So we feel like, well, we just see what other people are thinking. We just know what motivates other people around us. And in fact, there's this very complicated and specific mechanism in our brain that's generating these inferences and these perceptions. And so just like in vision, the most striking examples are to see the errors. And there's sort of two examples of this that I'm going to try to describe. So one is an error kids make. This is very easy to see as adults because we no longer make it, so we can feel smug and superior. So kids like 3 and 4-year-olds, tell them a story like this. So I have a cup of water, and I put my cup of water under my chair before I came in. But Carl stole my cup of water and put it under Mike's chair, because Mike's more famous. So then I came in, and you can ask a 3-year-old, where's Rebecca going to look for her cup of water? And we all know that I should look for my cup of water under my chair because that's where I put it, that's where I last saw it, and so that's where I still think it is. And 3-year-olds are sure, I'm going to look for it under Mike's chair because that's where it is, because I want my cup of water and that's where it is. And you can push them on this, like, really? So for example, you can show them, well, look, here comes Rebecca and she's looking for her cup of water under her chair. Why is she looking under her chair? And they say she must not want the cup of water, right? So they have this coherent theory that people will look for things. If they want something, they'll look for where it is. That's a pretty good theory, actually. And in fact, in kids' worlds, one of the good predictors of this, they're even more sure about this for adults than for kids, because adults are omniscient. They know where things are, right? And so by the time kids are 5, they don't do that anymore. They know that where I'm going to look for it depends on where I think it is. But these kind of, the error that gives it away, we make these kinds of mistakes too. They're just harder for us to see. And the example that, this is not funny, it's really sad. We totally underestimate the influence of authority. So we underestimate how hard it is to not do something that somebody is telling or asking you to do. We think that if there's no gun to your head and nobody's threatening you with anything, you can always just say no. And in so doing, we totally underestimate the power of situations to generate our behaviors. And this is really important because it leads us to make a lot of mistakes in evaluation. One particularly tragic example was the evaluation people made of the soldiers at Abu Ghraib, who were judged to be bad apples. And I think that's so tragic because there's 50 years of psychological research that says that what they did is what almost anyone would do in that kind of situation. And it's impossible to accept that. Even knowing all the research, emotionally I think, no, I wouldn't have done that. I would have just said no. I would have resisted. But there's no basis for this belief. It's like what Sam was saying. We can do experiment after experiment after experiment where you take somebody who's a perfectly good human being and just put them in a terrible situation where somebody's telling them to do something. And the most famous example, Stanley Milgram asked people to deliver shock as a part of an experiment to a totally innocent other volunteer in the same experiment. And the question was, how far would these volunteers go? How high would they let the shocks go? The experimenter's not threatening them, just saying, no, you have to continue. And how high a shock would they deliver? And the range of shocks was from slightly uncomfortable, and then they made mistakes that would get harder and harder until finally they were delivering shocks marked XXX to a man who had stopped screaming and was slumped down in his chair. And before this, Milgram asked both regular people and so-called experts to predict what proportion of the population would go all the way to the top. And they predicted, which makes total sense, almost nobody. Certainly not me, but almost nobody. Only the sadistic, crazy people. And the answer is 65% of the population. And the soldiers at Abu Ghraib were in that situation. And if we think that they are bad apples, then not only are we doing them a disservice, which we can feel one way or another about, but we're not solving the actual problem, right? Which was the situation that generated this kind of behavior. So I think that mistake at Abu Ghraib and the mistake that children make when they think people look for things where they are examples like this visual illusion. They show us that there's a mechanism at work. My research is looking at where that mechanism is. The next question is, how does that mechanism work? And that's, I think, a lifetime question.
Indeed.